Hey guys! We have a new crossover series. This is What If Naruto was in Mass Effect? The cycle has happened many times before, even the Protheans, one of those cycles spelling the end of the elemental nations and the usage of chakra, which was deemed too great a threat to the cycle for the Reapers to let survive. However, even the best attempts at genocide can fail, and now on Eden Prime, a man with a grudge awakens from a very long nap. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 1: The Long Nap. Distract with clones, wait until it's focusing on them, rush it from behind and stab repeatedly until the thing stops beeping data bayo. As he cut down another one of Orochimaru's metal men with the chakra spear he had picked up from a battlefield almost 3 months ago, Naruto couldn't help but wonder what had gone so wrong to lead to the situation they were in now. Where he had once been a proud member of a 100-strong ninja force, he was now one of about 30 surviving ninja, hiding out in the caves the metal man had been getting close to through the now rather generic and war-torn wasteland. The devastated landscape around him had been beautiful woodland in the heart of the Land of Fire a year ago, before Orochimaru's attack during the final of the Chunin exams in his home village of Konoha. According to the few survivors in the area around the Hokage Tower where Orochimaru himself had appeared, after the initial attack by Orochimaru's Sound Village and the traitorous Sand Village, who had until that point been Konoha's ally, the snake Sannin had trapped the Hokage in some kind of barrier jutsu that prevented any of the Konoha genin from trying to help their leader. Naruto didn't understand all of it. He had been too busy following Kakashi Taisha's orders to try and subdue some of the Sand genin who had been in the exam at the time, but Orochimaru had supposedly been one of the Hokage's former students before being cast out of the village for illegal and deadly human experiments. Supposedly the man held a grudge since then and had been plotting Konoha's downfall for years, though this was all based on what Jiraiya said about the traitorous missing Nin. The man had been on the same genin team as him after all. The rest of what happened became very difficult to understand, given the differing accounts and confusing melee that was occurring due to the invasion, but a few things were known as fact. Whether it was because he wasn't winning his little duel with the Hokage or that the invasion wasn't going according to plan, Naruto didn't know, but suddenly Orochimaru had flared his chakra to massive levels that could be felt throughout the center of Konoha, leaving some kind of summoned minions to keep the Sandaime busy. Shortly after he had done this, the skies began to darken and hell began to rain down. Initially, when meteors began to rain from the sky and slam into Konoha's buildings and streets, it was assumed it was some kind of jutsu, though admittedly one on a massive scale, but that all changed when the first shinobi to investigate the landing sites were obliterated by beams of death. From within the meteors came men of metal, armed with deadly weapons that could spell death at hundreds of meters with the accuracy that most shinobi could not match. The metal men were almost indiscriminate in their killing, Suna and Konoha ninja alike falling to their weapons. This was a turning point in the assault, as the Suna shinobi quickly called a truce with Konoha to deal with the metal men and their sound ninja allies, who seemed to have expected the metal men's arrival and were quick to turn on their former allies. Luckily, the sound ninja were not well coordinated or trained, and the metal men were ponderous and slow, meaning that despite their armament and numbers they were relatively easy to counteract and force back. But Naruto only learned of this change in alliances after returning to the city with the defeated and badly injured Gaara and Temari, carrying Sakura over his shoulder despite his injuries, having been attacked by the same metal men after defeating Shikaku. That had truly been the end of his childhood, as he remembered back to the end of what had been the most difficult fight of his life. Flashback. He had done it, defeating Gaara when even Sasuke team couldn't. Even with Temari stood in between the two of them, Naruto knew the fight was over. Despite her defiance, her earlier defeat left her barely able to stand, Gaara not focusing on him at all now as the young redhead stared up in shock at his sister. "Why protect me, Temari?" "Because you are my little brother, and I will always protect you even if you don't want me to." Whilst it was a touching scene of family reconciliation that Naruto could only wish would happen to him someday, he was distracted by the shout of one of his few remaining clones, who he had gotten to free Sakura when he had defeated Shikaku. Boss, above you. Looking up, Naruto saw what could only be a wave of meteors raining down towards them. At first he thought it might have been a jutsu by one of the sand genin, but given how close to him they were he thought it very unlikely as they would be caught in the attack as well. His clone's shout had alerted Gaara and Temari to the meteor as well, Temari quickly moving to help Gaara up, Naruto deciding to trust his instincts and help her. They barely made it to the tree line, which encircled the devastated wasteland where he and Gaara had fought, when the meteors began to impact. The earth shook and dust filled the air, as the four of them crouched under a hasty sand barrier that Gaara was struggling to maintain, the red head shaking with exertion even as Temari whimpered next to him. 30 seconds later, and the impact stopped, Naruto waiting a moment before looking out from underneath the shield. Whatever the hell that was, Dobe, I hope you weren't the one that did that. Sasuke's voice focused Naruto on the young Uchiha, who was standing near one of the craters just inside the tree line, multiple cuts and bruises showing the boy had been stood a little too close to the meteor impact site than was advisable. Suddenly there was a popping sound, audible from where Naruto was standing, inside the crater. Sasuke turned to look into the crater even as a light humming filled the air, the Uchiha's body language turning to one of shock as a flash of light filled Naruto's vision. Flashback end. Naruto didn't remember precisely what happened after that, only coming back to himself to Sakura's crying as shock set in, a pile of mangled Metal Man corpses scattered across the battlefield like leaves caught in a hurricane. If that had been all of them, that might have been the end of things and life would have returned to something approaching normal. But even as the Konoha ninja mourned their dead and tried to regroup after the battle, the skyships descended, the smallest of which easily the size of a house. Luckily, the initial attack of the Metal Men meant that when the surviving high-ranking ninja saw the skyships descending and blackening the sky, they ordered an evacuation of Konoha rather than trying to stay and fight. He and the other rookies had been lucky that day. Naruto thought even as he jumped back into the shadows, they had been considered too injured/inexperienced to continue the fight during the evacuation, instead being sent ahead to clear an evacuation route for the civilians to follow. So when the initial bombardment had wiped the center of Konoha from the map in but a few moments, all they could do was watch in abject horror as their entire life was wiped from existence. Niji, Lee and Shino had been amongst the many who hadn't made it out of the massacre, the three of them having been being treated in the makeshift trauma centers when the attack had begun. In fact, Naruto thought bitterly as he shooshined back to the cave entrance, it was easier to remember those that were still alive at this point rather than those that had perished, given that he could count those from Konoha in the group on 2 hands. Waiting a moment at the entrance whilst the seals recognized his chakra, Naruto then stepped into the cave that would soon become their temporary tomb. Even as he saw the long mane of white hair that he instantly recognized, Naruto had to bite back the indignity he felt at Jiraiya's plan, his dark side and the Kyuubi screaming at him to take the fight to the Metal Men to make them pay for what they had done. But the old sage had spoken the truth when he had argued against that kind of heroic final assault. The Metal Men's numbers seemed innumerable, and even bringing down some of their sky ships had no effect on their tactics. So instead, Jiraiya wanted to use the shinobi tactic of deception. The Metal Men seemed to be following their life signs, and from what the few surviving Oto ninja had told them, the Metal Men wouldn't stop until everyone of the planet was gone. So with that in mind, Jiraiya had offered their current plan instead, and given the statuesque forms of his comrades that now lay on the ground deep inside the cave itself, the old man was nearly done. "Are you sure about this, Ero Sennin? What if this doesn't work? Or what if you can't get back to us once the Metal Men leave?" These were all questions Naruto had asked before. In fact, he had gone further several times when speaking to the Toad Sannin in private. What if the Metal Men didn't leave? What if Jiraiya died before he could come and awaken them again? As I have said before, Gaki, the ceiling will work. I doubt that the Metal Men will do a visual sweep seeing as they have those scanner things. And we have tested this against those scanners, remember, so we will be fine. And I have to be the one to do this. Unlike you, I can suppress my chakra enough that when I go to the Toads they won't be able to find me. Once they have gone I will return or send another survivor. Given these bastards don't bleed, I think blood will be a good enough trigger to break the seals. Now, quickly before another patrol comes this way. Jiraiya gestured to the plinth of stone, covered in seals that were an integral part of the plan to disguise Naruto's chakra and put him into stasis like the others. Unlike the others who had been put in stasis whilst lying down, making their forms look like they were sleeping, Naruto had insisted he stand up for his petrification, as Jiraiya called it. As he took his place and Jiraiya began the hand signs to complete the sealing process, Naruto muttered the motto that he had picked up from Kakashi, who had gone down whilst on a rescue mission 3 months into the invasion. Better to die on your feet, protecting the innocent, than hiding like a worm in the trash. The sensation of sleep quickly washed over him and Naruto adopted what he had decided would be his pose, stood feet shoulder width apart with the spear digging into the platform just off from his right foot. Lastly, his face was set in what he hoped was a defiant look as he stared at the cave entrance, before everything went black. It was supposed to have been an easy assignment. That was the thought that went through Nirali body as she continued to stagger away from her pursuers, her left hand trying to cover the heavy wound to her stomach. A nasty memento, gained from her first encounter with one of the zombies now chasing her. Take a secondment on one of the newly colonized worlds. They paid corpsmen extra as there was a lack of skilled personnel willing to work so far out on the frontier, earn enough for an early retirement back to Earth with Sange. A simple plan that she had felt was perfect, despite Sange's worries about her being stationed on the edge of the terminus, and the threat of pirates and Batarian slavers. Given the Geth attack and what they had done to the poor colonists, whose corpses now pursued her, Nirali would take pirates any day. Up ahead was the strange statue of a boy armed with a spear. It had been there when she arrived 3 months ago, and when she asked around, Nirali had found that the statue had actually been found in the initial Prothean ruins that had been excavated. This had garnered some interest, until they had excavated out the strange beacon artifact all the scientists had been going crazy over. Even as she stumbled into it, the blood loss played havoc with her balance. Nirali felt there should have been more interest in why the Protheans had a human statue. Especially when 50,000 years ago humans would not have been evolved enough for the clothes and weapons the statue had with it. But as she stumbled round the statue before falling to the ground, Nirali realized that wasn't going to be a question she got an answer to in this lifetime, drawing her pistol with her free hand as the sounds of the zombies came closer and closer. "I'm sorry, Sange, so sorry." Her whisper was almost drowned out by the approaching zombies, her focus on the approaching enemies meaning that she missed the small crack of the statue's outer shell breaking slightly where her bloody handprint rested. Chapter 2: One hell of a way to wake up. It was like waking too early from a much-needed sleep, his senses dulled even as his rocky confines began to flex and crack around him. Naruto was aware enough to be cautious, however, sending a pulse of chakra out just in case it had been a sound Nin or some other hostile that had managed to activate the release seals. He was glad he had, as he instantly sensed several things that made him wonder quite how long he had been asleep, one in particular that turned his slowly waking mind to anger. With a flex of his muscles his former prison was shattered outwards, Kushina, what he had called his spear in honor of his mother, singing with his chakra as he moved with practiced ease to combat the foes that he had sensed in front of him. Now he could see them rather than just feel their presence. Naruto was disgusted by the appearance of the experiments in front of him, obviously another experiment unleashed by Orochimaru upon the survivors of the elemental nations. If he hadn't believed in zombies before, he definitely did now. For all the horror these things no doubt inspired due to their gruesome appearance, they were slow, ponderous, and had less chakra than the average civilian. So Naruto was caught slightly off guard when his spear stabbed straight into the first experiment's skull with sickening ease. The fact that the former human hadn't even tried to dodge or block was off-putting for someone used to fighting ninja. Even as the other husks, he refused to call them zombies anymore, as that was making them sound more dangerous than they are, turned from their pursuit to face this new foe he was amongst them. Sharpened by his chakra, Kushina decapitated another one whilst the chakra-reinforced fist punched straight through the third's chest, causing it to collapse like a sack of potatoes as Naruto spun away from the remaining 2 husks' grasping hands. There was a loud sound like a whip crack and one of the husks staggered forwards. 2 more retorts before its head exploded without warning, though Naruto could tell the attack had come from the human survivor he had sensed was being chased by these things when he had awakened. But he could worry about that later, the last husk suddenly beginning to glow with lightning like some of the metal men had after the invasion. Given that such a buildup of power was almost universally a bad thing, Naruto was not going to let the thing finish whatever it was preparing, but at the same time the husk was too close to the only normal human he had been able to sense around him. Judging by her injuries, the woman wouldn't be able to avoid the technique, and Naruto needed information as there was no way he was in Konoha anymore. Nali didn't know where the boy had come from, but as he tore through the zombies that had been about to kill her, she was very grateful for his arrival. In an attempt to aid him, not that she thought he needed it considering how quickly he killed the first 2 zombies, Nali aimed her pistol and with 3 shots she managed to take down one of the others, leaving the one closest to her alive as her pistol clicked that it was overheated. The nimbus of energy that appeared around the last zombie worried her even if it was facing the boy. She had seen the attack earlier when several of the monstrosities got amongst the unit she had been attached to, and given the damage to her suit meant that her shield was down, there was no way she was getting out of another attack well. She shook her pistol in the hope the thing would magically cool, taking her eyes off the zombie for a moment to focus on the pistol, only for the thing's screech to cut off in a grunt that sounded remarkably human-like. Looking up, she caught sight of the boy with his spear blade cutting straight through the thing's chest parallel to the ground, before with a yell of exertion he lifted the thing with his spear in a full toss over his shoulder. The resulting momentum that came with the motion causing the zombie to detach from the spear with a metallic scraping sound, its body flying well over a dozen meters before slamming into a wall and discharging its attack harmlessly. Even as the dust settled, Nali suddenly found herself forcefully hoisted into an upright position, the boy now looking at her with an angry expression before he started speaking rapidly in a language that she didn't recognize. Thankfully her universal translator did a moment later, as suddenly his sounds became words, though that didn't necessarily put her in any better shape given that she had no way of replying that wouldn't look like a threat to the obviously dangerous boy. "Where are the others? What are these new monsters? Did Jiraiya send you?" Struggling for breath as his hand at her injured shoulder was causing a lot of pain, Nali did her best to sound non-threatening or aggressive as she replied, praying the boy knew English. "Please, I don't know any more than you. If you would calm down, I can try and help you." The blank look on his face made it clear that the boy didn't understand her, but to her surprise his grip softened, and he seemed to give it some thought for a moment before nodding to himself and forming a strange sign. Suddenly there was a massive plume of smoke, and before Nali's eyes the boy multiplied. There were at least 20 of him, all armed with that strange spear, most of them running off in various directions through the city's outskirts, one of them moving to the remains of the zombies whilst the closest one to her turned back to her. "Now, it seems that you either cannot or will not speak in my tongue, so whether or not you are with Orochimaru or not will have to be determined otherwise." The boy's tone made it clear if he did not believe her then the consequences would not be good for her, and given what she had seen of him in combat, and those copies of himself, it would also not be good for any other Alliance forces in the area still alive. So, praying that the boy would understand, Nali started speaking whilst using her good hand to mime what the words slowly in the hope that the boy would not think she was activating some tech. Judging by the way he stiffened and raised his spear at the movement, she didn't have much confidence. Shepard knew this mission could be going better. They were already a man down, and Nihlus had dropped off the comms, idiot Spectre assuming they were almighty unkillable machines as per usual. If that weren't enough, when they reached the dig site where the Prothean beacon was meant to being held, the thing had been moved and the place was swarming with Geth who were doing their best to slaughter each and every human in their path, combatant or otherwise. Luckily they had managed to save some people, Shepard's medic skills proving their use once again as she treated those she could of the survivors at the research camp, the smattering of scientists and technicians bringing hope to Caden and the Marine they had managed to save. Ashley Williams had impressed her thus far, the girl barely into her 20s and more skilled with weapons than most of the Marines aboard the Normandy. Nothing on an N7 operative, of course, Jane thought a little smugly as she warp-lanced another Geth trooper that had been hiding in the upper section of one of the storage units by the docking bays, dropping a husk that had been trying to rush her with a shotgun blast at the same time. "Commander, I think you need to see this, it's Nihlus." Ashley's call as the three of them began their sweep of the area made Jane groan. That kind of request never had a happy ending to it. After finding Nihlus' body and marking the area for pickup and further investigation after the mission was over, A dead Spectre and accusations that it was another Turian Nihlus knew was the sort of thing she would get screwed with by the brass if she didn't. Jane had kept them moving towards the spaceport as fast as they could manage. Initially, when the Geth had been made aware of their presence, probably during the encounter in which they had saved Williams and some survivors that the Geth had been about to sacrifice on giant metal spikes, they had come in their droves. Jane had been forced to stop just out, set up a kill zone as the Normandy told her of the attackers it had detected on its scanners, planting explosive traps and enlisting a few of the surviving militia they had saved in preparation. Even with the foreknowledge and preparations, they had barely been able to hold the line. 3 more dead militiamen on her hands, she thought bitterly. But now they were merely encountering outposts of Geth in easily manageable numbers. So either the bastards had been forced to withdraw with their larger ship or something else was grabbing their attention. As much as the hero inside her worried about the deaths that were probably occurring due to this distraction, Jane knew there was little she could do about it without the risk of being overwhelmed herself, which both would fail the mission and probably mean the colonists' deaths regardless. The Geth plan of destroying the spaceport with their bombs was an obvious attempt at asset denial as well as disguising the true purpose behind the attack. Thankfully, Caden was skilled enough with explosives to disarm the damn things whilst she and Ashley kept the slowly growing horde of Geth back. They were going to struggle to make it though. With 2 bombs left to defuse and both behind the Geth strong points, they would need to do something risky in order to break through, and despite what some said about her brash and impulsive nature, Shepard was not big on unnecessary risks. Still, desperate times meant she ordered Ashley and Caden to cover her as she prepared to try a close-quarters assault. Hopefully she would be able to break up the Geth defenses enough to leave them open to the other 2. Her imagined heroic charge didn't quite go to plan, her shields failing before she had covered even half the distance, and she was forced to roll behind some plasteel crates. Geth fire now from 3 sides, meaning she was truly pinned. The keening screech of husks made her bad situation even worse. The former humans would either overwhelm her if she stayed in cover or expose her to the deadly fire from the other defenders if she tried to kite them. She heard them getting closer and closer, readying her shotgun as she prepared to shift out and nail the first couple of them, only to get a call from Caden through the team comm system. "Commander, behind you." The call made her whirl around just in time to see a dark brown-clothed figure blur past her, a spear of all things in hand as he slammed into the husks that had been about to attack her. Shepard also noted at the same moment that the fire from the Geth was slowly dropping off and decided to risk taking a look at the situation. Looking out from her cover, Shepard was shocked to see more of the same figure engaged with the Geth troopers, moving between them with a speed that she doubted any normal human could manage. His technique with the spear was horrible. The tactical part of her mind noted as one of his swings overbalanced one of the figures, leaving it open to a blast from one of the surviving Geth. The look of pain on the boy's face had her rushing forwards towards him, warp lance splitting the offending Geth in 2 as she tried to work out what treatment she would need to give him, but then to her shock the boy disappeared in a burst of smoke. The remaining figures not even breaking their strides as they continued to decimate the remaining Geth. Reservations about this strange new type of biotics aside, Jane couldn't deny she was grateful for the assistance, even if she still didn't trust their newest ally. The Cerberus sleeper agent among her N7 squad who had killed 2 of her comrades when he had been outed as a traitor was a definite factor in her distrust, but given the situation she didn't really have much choice. As she signaled for Caden to make a move towards the bombs as the last Geth was punctured straight through its eye stalk, Jane decided that she needed to at least try and talk with their mystery figure, the only one remaining after the others disappeared in similar puffs of smoke to the one she had seen shot. Shotgun still at the ready just in case, Jane stopped about 10 m from him as he seemed to be talking in his ear, probably a communicator. When he turned to face her, Jane was truly surprised at how young their savior actually looked now he was standing still. At best he was in his late teens, only just taller than her with an open face that had some strange whisker-type tattoos upon them, shaggy neck-length blonde hair shifting slightly in Eden Prime's wind. Despite this there was a definite air of danger about him, even ignoring the fact she had just seen him destroy a dozen Geth and at least as many husks, so she hefted her shotgun defensively just in case. "I am Commander Jane Shepard of the Alliance Navy. Who are you and are you going to be a problem?" Probably not the most diplomatic way to have put it, But given the Geth were after the beacon, it wouldn't be a big jump to assume other unsavory organizations were after it as well. Given his skills, he might well be another attempt to create a human super soldier. The blonde seemed offended by her questions and gestured around in a very obvious "really?" Then he began speaking in Japanese, her universal translator taking a moment to bring up the language conversion, but it was barely noticeable. "Whoa, crazy lady, don't point that at me. I just saved your ungrateful ass if you didn't notice. Here I am trying to do something nice." He seemed to take a moment, and his expression calmed, a smile crossing onto his face even as Jane glared at him for calling her crazy. "I am Uzumaki Naruto, and I won't even bother trying to tell you where I am from, as that didn't work at all with the last woman. Let's just say I am not affiliated with anyone or anything that you might be thinking of. As interested as you no doubt are in me, perhaps we should focus on getting rid of the rest of these metal men before you carry on with your terrible attempt to try and interrogate me." The haughty and slightly mischievous tone in this newly introduced Naruto's voice was obviously meant to get on her nerves and put her on the back foot. But he had a point about the Geth, and given his point about just leaving them to be overwhelmed, she would have to trust him for now. She would get him back for his comments later, and oddly, she found herself rather looking forward to it. Chapter 3: To the Citadel. Shepard's first thoughts as she awoke were of pain. Every part of her body ached like she had just finished 3 days of PT followed by trying to keep up with the Krogan in a drinking contest. Given that level of discomfort, it took her a few moments to remember what had led up to her being in this sorry state. With the bombs dealt with, they had moved through into the spaceport in time to encounter another wave of Geth soldiers. Obviously the Geth knew their attempt to flatten the spaceport, and the beacon with it had failed, and therefore were attempting to deal with the intruders physically. Jane had to give it to Naruto. Even if the boy didn't have the slightest idea what these metal men were or how they worked, he was very skilled at taking them apart using strange knives and his spear when he managed to get in close with them. His clones, as Naruto called them, were also very useful as distractions and decoys, moving ahead of the main group to scout for traps and ambushes. The fact that they were somehow relaying info back to him given his precognitive awareness of their enemies' movements was a further boon, and something that Jane was going to ask him about after they secured the beacon. But given the general evasiveness and hostility that Naruto showed whenever she or one of the others got anywhere near him, it had not really seemed like the right time. That thought brought the last few minutes of her memories back with sharp clarity. As she heard the sound of raised voices, a combination of the two caused her to awaken entirely, eyes snapping open as she scanned the room quickly before she moved. The view of overhead medical instruments, as well as the chemical smell, made it clear that she was in the medbay. Now she was fully cognizant. Jane could hear two voices raised in argument, both familiar to her and arguing about her from the sounds of it. "As I've told you previously, the medbay is for authorized personnel only. It's bad enough that I had to post 2 guards on the door after we initially removed you from here. But according to Dr. Chuckwas, you were back in here in minutes with no one outside any the wiser, and as captain of this ship such a security breach cannot be ignored." The rather resigned tone of Captain Anderson reminded her of when they had first worked together whilst she was still in the N7. It was nice to hear it being directed at someone other than herself for once. "I don't care if you're the lord of the fricking universe, you bastard. It's bad enough you dragged me away from wherever we were, through space, and to see this council that I have never heard of. You still haven't explained to me where I was when I woke up, how I got there, or what the metal men were doing, even if I believe you when you say that my friends weren't there when I was found." Shepard leaders, translation of Taicho, which is about as respectful as I can see Naruto being. Actions mean we are honor-bound, and I will not leave her side unless she tells me to. Though the first burst had been rather fiercely stated, by the end of his outburst Naruto sounded a lot more serious and calm, the connotations of what he said really hitting home with Jane as she composed herself before sitting up and speaking. "I don't know if pushing you away from the beacon after you rescued Ashley means you are whatever this honor-bound means, Naruto. It is not as if you can say I saved your life or anything." Now she was sat up. Jane could see the 2 men stood at the end of the bed, Naruto's face lighting up a little as he turned to face her with a hint of a smile that seemed far more at home there than the frowns and blank looks he adorned during the mission. "Shepard leader, you are awake." Then as what she said sunk in, Naruto shook his head, but the smile didn't fade. "And of course it counts. After all, as far as we were concerned, that energy from the beacon could have killed whoever it came into contact with, and you still saved me whilst risking yourself. If we only agreed someone saved our life by them dying for us, it would be a lot harder to pay them back. Cammy only knows I have enough of them to pay back that I cannot physically do, so I'm afraid you are stuck with me, Captain. Despite his apology, Naruto didn't look even slightly sorry, as a cough from Anderson brought both of their attention back to the captain, as he did his best to remain professional despite obviously being pleased Jane had awoken. Despite whatever debt you feel you need to pay the commander, Alliance regulations do not allow for children to share. That was as far as he got before Naruto cut him off, the boy looking seriously angry for the first time since Jane had met him. I am not a child, Databeo. Just because I haven't had my growth spurt yet. I am almost 17 and I have been a ninja for almost 7 years, which means I probably have more fighting experience than most of your crew. A/N. Before people explode at this number, it includes the time that Naruto spent at the academy, including the 2 years he failed before passing on the 3rd time. Ninja? Given his clothing and fighting style, Jane doubted that he was a ninja by their definition, though it could be a designation given to him by whoever it was that trained him to be the child soldier he obviously was. And besides, if what I have read up on these Spectre things is true, then Jane might become one and become separate from the Alliance anyway. Suddenly Naruto's defiant tone faded a bit, and he looked almost wistful as he spoke the next sentence. Also, from what Nirali-chan has told me, I am technically way older than any of you, so I don't need you trying to order me around. That comment caused Jane to raise an eyebrow in confusion. What was Naruto talking about? Anderson obviously saw her look and seemed to come to a decision, gesturing to one of the Marines who seemed to be there solely to keep an eye on Naruto if their focused gaze was anything to go by. Go and get serviceman body a soldier. I think the commander will need to hear both sides of this tale firsthand. As the Marine saluted and turned to go out of the door, Anderson turned back to Jane with a serious look on his face. You have been unconscious for 2 days, Shepard, and in that time I have had the pleasure of doing my best to get some information out of this one, just as he has been determined to spend that time either browsing the extranet for all the information available, or doing his best to avoid me where he can. Naruto pulled a rather impolite face at this rather pointed comment, and Jane found herself smiling almost despite herself even as her headache continued to throb rather incessantly. Anderson either didn't see the face or was ignoring it as he continued. Despite my reservations about his validity, if what Mr. Uzumaki claims is true, then his survival on Eden Prime is even more important to the Council than the beacon. Not that this will mean they won't try and pin its destruction on you, of course. But we will get to that particular bombshell in a minute. I think it is best if we discuss what happened with the beacon. Shepard, what do you remember? Despite her urge to know what the hell Anderson was talking about regarding Naruto, Shepard knew an implied order when she heard one, so she did her best to remember the last minutes of Eden Prime and more importantly the vision that she had gotten through the beacon. Whilst Anderson looked mildly worried by what she was telling him, Naruto looked really excited. That sounds like what happened on my world. Perhaps the beacon is like Ino-chan having put a memory in it or something. Somehow Jane doubted it. The thoughts felt almost entirely alien to her. Then her mind caught up with her, and she looked at Naruto in what she hoped was a serious questioning face rather than the more unprofessional confusion she was feeling. She had a strange suspicion where this conversation was going. No, I don't think so, Naruto. And why would one of your friend's memories be inside the beacon? Unless this is some kind of hallucination. Anderson shook his head at her obvious askance. A knock at the medbay door indicating the arrival of this Badia who would hopefully break whatever prank these two were trying to pull on her. Indicating to the Marine to open the door for a woman probably in her late 30s, early 40s, Anderson had gained some of his usual good humor back. That is what I thought at first as well, Commander, but given what Mr. Uzumaki can do as well as what Serviceman Badia has told us, I suppose I should let you tell her, Serviceman. Given the nervous look on the woman's face as she began her tale, her body language indicating she was expecting some kind of negative reaction to her words, Shepard knew that weird visions of destruction and mayhem on a massive scale might not actually be the weirdest thing she was going to have to deal with today. The remaining time until they reached the Citadel had been interesting for the crew of the Normandy, given the large number of blonde-haired clones that had been swarming every deck of the ship investigating, questioning and generally making a nuisance of himself as he did his best to learn more about the universe he had come to exist in. Even the Naruto who had been in the medbay when she had awoken turned out to be a clone, poofing away as Anderson had tried to have the Marines escort him from the room. Proof if any was needed that Naruto still did not trust any of them. Despite this rather sudden increase in activity aboard, Jane had found herself relatively undisturbed as she did her best to carry out an investigation on the body of Nihlus in the cargo area of the Normandy. Whilst she would have preferred to carry out the investigation in situ, that was beyond her control now, so she would do her best with what she had. Whilst Naruto being perched on top of the Mako watching had been slightly irritating at first, when she had been trying to reconstruct the crime scene, that irritation turned to awe as Naruto not only offered to help but spawned several more clones that would take up the positions of the Geth corpses in the nearby area. Before they became corpses, of course. 2 of the Geth were ruled out as relevant from the after-action reports Ashley had taken down before finding Nihlus, but that still left 4 Geth that had been killed presumably by Nihlus. As she looked around at their positions, Jane came to the same conclusion she had come to when she had originally looked over Nihlus' body in the medbay, speaking out loud to provide insight to Naruto in case he hadn't gotten the same hunch. These Geth didn't kill Nihlus, that much is clear. To her surprise, there was no question or agreement from Naruto, and when she turned to face him, she found herself looking at Nihlus, fully dressed in his battle gear and reading from the datapad that held most of the evidence reports from the ground. If she didn't already know of Naruto's shape-changing abilities, Jane would have been a lot more on edge, something that obviously upset the henge ninja as his smirk faded and he spoke up, his voice sounding more than a little weird coming from Nihlus' jaws. I thought that perhaps if we worked out Nihlus' movements we could work out what happened, Taicho, but what makes you certain that this wasn't a Geth? I can't imagine a colonist having either the ability or the motive to off a Spectre who is alert and in the middle of a war zone. And that was the rub that she would have to solve before they reached the council. With the witness reports of another Turian and Anderson's claim that this Saren was another Spectre, Jane was going to have to be impeccable in her report, otherwise she or even Naruto might well end up taking the stick for the incident. That was if this wasn't a giant council black ops operation to destabilize human interests, of course. If that was the case, they were all screwed. Nihlus was shot with a mass effect round at nearly point-blank range from behind, which matches up with the witness account. No, it's in this section, you were on the photo evidence. Breaking from her rather pessimistic train of thought to help Naruto as he struggled to find the witness statement of the dock worker she was talking about, Jane was glad that whilst the young man, as she didn't want to call him boy anymore after his rather aggressive reaction to Anderson doing the same thing, was definitely more powerful than her in hand-to-hand combat, and very dangerous given his clones, was an absolute rookie when it came to technology in any form. Even the automatic doors had supposedly spooked him at first when they had brought her back aboard the Normandy, and his lack of technical aptitude wouldn't be disappearing for a while, it seems. Given the stories he had told her in their breaks from the investigation of what some of the other ninja from his world had been able to do and had done from the little history of the elemental nations he was able to remember, Jane was glad that Naruto, for all his penchant of irritating Anderson to the point of an aneurysm, was understanding enough or trusting enough to not go postal on them for the loss of his friends. If someone like Naruto had thought they had been involved with their removal, Eden Prime would probably be little more than a lifeless hole in the ground now. Not a positive train of thought, but as she saw Naruto fist pump in celebration as he managed to single-handedly move from the witness report to the scans that had been taken of the area's surfaces, Jane could see that despite the large amounts of emotional pain that Naruto was in, his spirit wouldn't allow him to force his anger onto others if they didn't deserve it, bearing the emotional burden instead like a badge of pride on show for the whole world to see. Stepping out off the docking bay area with Ashley and Naruto in tow, Naruto now dressed in heavy armor that had been modified for his size, though his still kept his jacket and spear to complete the look, Shepard was surprised to find a pair of heavily armed CSCC officers waiting for them. The Turian of the pair speaking up in what he obviously thought was an official tone. "Commander, I have orders to take that thing into custody." He nodded his head at Naruto, either not noticing or not caring about how Naruto stiffened at his term of address, hand twitching towards the spear at his back. Trying to defuse the situation before the officer carried on and made Naruto do something he would regret, as well as finding out what was going on, Shepard stepped between them. On what grounds do you want to take him in? I know that he can't have done anything to warrant. She paused as the other CCC officer, a rather nervous-looking Salarian, held up a data pad with official-looking writing on it. Directly from the council, given what has been claimed by the subject, it has been decided that further questioning needs to take place in order to validate your claims. If something about the situation hadn't smelled fishy before, it sure as hell did now. The council were to see them in a few hours anyway. Why would they want Naruto taken in by CCC? And more importantly, why would the council let anyone know about Naruto, since the communication from Udina had been that the whole thing was to be a secret until the Alliance and the council claimed otherwise? She was about to state as such when help came from an unexpected source, Ambassador Udina himself coming through the doors behind them with his escort. Whether he had been able to hear the conversation through the door or one of the others had patched him into the coma, Jane didn't know, but it was definitely the first time that she had been glad to see the politician in person. If that were indeed a council mandate from Mr. Uzumaki's arrest, it would have to have my signature attached to it as the Alliance's ambassador, or failing that, an admiral's consent, of which I am without doubt certain you have either. So what we are going to do instead is find out whether this is an illegal attempt to detain an Alliance citizen without just cause and faking a council mandate, or whether you pair are CCC members at all. Jane had to admit that she underestimated Udina given how quickly he had turned the situation around on the CCC officers, who looked at each other for a moment before going for their weapons as two other Turians in the background drew assault rifles. Before the Turian could finish drawing his shotgun, Naruto was inside his guard, spear slamming into his shields and deflecting off to the side, but the blunt force of the blows still knocked the Turian off of his feet as his shields collapsed. The Salarian started turning in a mix of shock and anger at his comrade being downed so easily, only for Udina's guards to mow him down in a concentrated blaze of fire that Jane and Ashley were happy to contribute to. As Naruto's spear put the gasping Turian out of his misery with a thrust to the neck, the other attackers seemed to reconsider their attempted ambush and broke into the screaming and panicking crowds that made up the dock's travelers. Definitely not the way she wanted their first trip to the Citadel to start out. Chapter 4: Never invite a ninja to a show trial. As she finished giving her evidence to the council about Nihlus' death, Jane could already tell it was pointless. Though she had at least managed to turn the direction of the hearing back towards the death of the Spectre instead of just lambasting humanity's perceived failures. Using the analysis of his wounds to rule out both a Geth and human attacker, the council were never going to condemn one of their top agents. Saren seemed to know this as well, the slight apprehension he had shown when Jane had brought up the forensics melting away back to the arrogance and superiority complex he had demonstrated throughout the short hearing thus far. This farce proves nothing other than you let a Spectre die and still failed your mission objective, which was to protect the beacon. Given the damage to it, I doubt we will be able to ever restore its functionality. Jane had to rely on every inner scrap of her professional decorum not to unleash a tirade at Saren and the council for their attitude. She was quite proud of her restraint until a familiar voice called out from behind her on the left. "Ano, considering you kept telling us how you couldn't possibly have been at Eden Prime and that you had nothing to do with the mission, Saren-san, you seem to know an awful lot of information about what happened there." You could have heard a pin drop in the suddenly silent council chambers, Jane inwardly cheering for the boy's seemingly oblivious comment that threw the whole hearing back at Saren. Naruto's words seemed to have caught everyone off guard, proof if any was needed that the boy was more astute than he let on most of the time. Saren's delay in response for those 2 or 3 seconds, all the proof Jane needed that he was lying through his teeth with his next statement. "When Nihlus died, all of his files were transferred to me by the council, including all the information about the mission that led to his demise. I was not impressed by what I read. But then again, humans and those that they claim are from the time of the Protheans." That was as far as Saren got before Udina cut him off, the ambassador more livid than Jane imagined possible as he pointed an accusing finger at the council. "You gave all the documents related to a murder and attempted colony genocide to the person we have proof was involved in it?" Udina seemed to be about to continue when the room suddenly became several degrees colder, and when Naruto next spoke his voice was lower, almost as if he was growling, though each word could be heard with remarkable clarity. So not only do you give the person being accused of an act of war upon the Alliance all the information he needs to make any questioning useless, but you also inform him of a highest-level secret that he then blurts out to an entire room of dignitaries like an genin trying to impress his playground friends. Jane hadn't thought of the implications of Saren getting hold of the mission documents the way Naruto had worded it, and it was clear that no one else in the room had either. Saren started to speak only for Naruto to speak over him in a manner that made it clear that he wasn't yet done. And not once do you stop him from being a bastard and talking about the Alliance like they are trash and deserve the Geth attack. It's almost as if you agree with what he is saying. What had been a few quiet murmurs amongst the gathered crowd suddenly became a fervor not just from the humans there but also many of the minor council races as they realized quite what Naruto was implying. Jane was gobsmacked at the gall Naruto had, not only accusing Saren of the Geth attack but of the council for effectively supporting it, and providing him with information to defend himself of being accused of his involvement. Despite the fact she felt she should step in and stop him before he got the council to actually arrest him legally this time, Jane couldn't quite ignore the part of herself that was internally cheering as Naruto sent 3 of the most powerful people of the galaxy into a very uncomfortable position. You accuse this council. The Turian counselor looked only a couple of seconds from ordering CCC to do just what Jane feared, talons gripping the handrail on his podium hard enough for the creaking to be heard from where Jane was stood. Unlike the Turian, however, the Asari and Salarian counselors were a lot more astute of the mood of the room, and with only the smallest flick of her hand the Asari froze the Turian in place before he could do any more damage than he already might have with his outburst. Casting her eyes back to Naruto, Jane was surprised to see him glance at her at the same time, the young ninja seeming to question whether he should continue or not with his destruction of the galaxy's most revered political force. With a small sigh, Jane gave a small shake of her head, something she knew the more aware people in the room would catch before Naruto spoke once more, his voice returning to normal as he smiled and reached up to scratch the top of his head. Accuse? I apologize most humbly, Counselor-sama, if that is what you took my words to be. I merely was pointing out a couple of areas that I felt needed to be fully explained to avoid any confusion arising. The switch between cold-hearted soldier and cheerful, bemused boy happened so fast that Jane suspected most people thought Naruto had been switched with someone else, or had a bipolar disorder. And despite his grin, Naruto's eyes made it clear that the olive branch he was giving the council at this stage was one that he was more than happy to take back at any time. Obviously, he was hiding more than Jane thought, given how even she had been surprised by the ease at which the boy had outmaneuvered everyone in the room, though that was probably because nobody else would ever have the balls to accuse the leaders of the main 3 races of supporting attempted genocide. The Salarian was the quickest to react, the frog-like alien barely glancing at his colleagues before rapidly filling the awkward silence that followed Naruto's change in tactics. Very well, Uzumaki, wasn't it? We will ignore your rather abrupt way of raising your points for now. But I ask that you make your tone a little more respectful towards this council in future, and not to address us in such a manner. Jane winced as she could see in her mind's eye Naruto's grin widening at the rebuke, but to her surprise he said nothing as the Salarian continued. In regards to your questions, the process of transferring mission data between Spectres in the event of an Spectre's death is all automated as soon as a Spectre's death is confirmed. This allows for any pertinent and time-sensitive data that might be useful in following up the Spectre's death to be pursued as quickly as possible. That actually made sense to Jane, and seemed to mollify the crowd a bit, the Asari taking over as she put on her best smile towards Naruto. How Saren got hold of the other information will be discussed outside of this hearing, as I can assure you the Council did not give out this information to anyone outside of us 3. There is already an investigation going on regarding the 2 CCC officers and their illegal attempted arrest of you when you arrived at the Citadel. I am sure Saren will be more than happy to oblige in telling us how he gained that information to the investigating officers when the time comes. The Asari looked up pointedly at Saren at this, making it clear that no argument of any kind would be permitted at this stage. The change in tone towards Saren and the hearing in general was incredible, Jane almost laughing at the disgruntled look on the Spectre's face as he was chastised in front of everyone. But the matter remains that there is no concrete evidence that you can provide us with that would indicate that Saren was anywhere near Eden Prime, let alone leading the Geth against the colony. The pointed avoidance of Naruto's last accusation/question about Saren's anti-human attitude was obvious to Jane as the Asari tried to bring the hearing to a close as fast as possible. Though given how much damage Naruto had done by speaking for less than a minute meant that Jane wasn't really surprised they were trying to avoid giving him any more airtime. Therefore, Ambassador, with no conclusive results from the CCC investigation either, your petition to have Spectre Saren barred from the Spectres is denied. There were more than a few angry shouts from the crowd at this, but Saren seemed to gain some of his former smugness back as he nodded thankfully to the counselors before offering a mocking bow in Udina, Shepard and Anderson's direction. I am glad to see that justice has been served. Then the image wavered and disappeared, leaving Jane with a foul taste in her mouth as the Asari adjourned the meeting, CCC guards quickly vacating the crowds from the area before any more trouble arose. Udina was an interesting cross between frustrated and delighted as he quickly made his way over to Naruto and shook his hand rapidly. I have never seen the council change their attitude so quickly, and you definitely had them on the defensive regarding the data transfer to Saren. Despite this, Naruto did not look pleased in the slightest. His grin faded to a frown as he looked at the three rapidly conversing counselors behind the sound barrier they had erected when they finished the meeting. Seeing this and curious about his rapid change in attitude, Jane decided to ask a question that she knew might open a whole can of worms, but at least they would mostly be aimed at the council rather than at her. Naruto, what is the matter? I know we didn't get Saren, but we got somewhere, right? Naruto shook his head and nodded in the direction of the Solarian counselor, eyes narrowing for a moment before nodding to himself. It's not that, Jane Taishu. I think a little investigating of our own will help us there. I am more concerned that the Solarian, right? Yeah, he lied right to our faces about that file transfer, though I have no idea what the word automated means. To his credit, Udina didn't even question Naruto's statement. Obviously, the boy had very much impressed him during the hearing itself, the ambassador resisting the obvious urge to get back on the podium and start laying into the council once more. But what do we do regarding finding any evidence regarding Saren? Check in with CCC? That girl seemed to have an axe to grind with Saren. Jane's question seemed to bring Udina back to reality, the ambassador quickly going over all the flaws they had in the hearing, though he could have done it in a slightly less petulant manner. 5 minutes later, Jane was heading back down the Presidium with her team of 3 in tow, several humans stopping them on the way to congratulate Naruto on taking it to those bigoted counselors, Naruto looking distinctly uncomfortable with the positive attention that he was receiving. He only cheered up when they made it to the lift and were once again on their own, both Ashley and Kaden looking at him in slight awe as he leaned back against the wall with a sigh before giving a smirk and asking the question that was on Jane's own mind. So, whose heads are we going to smack together first, Jane Taishu? Persona, Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto wouldn't say he was particularly happy with how things had turned out thus far, but given he had woken up seemingly tens of thousands of years later than planned and was now on a freaking spaceship easily twice the size of the Land of Fire surrounded by aliens, he liked to think he was doing fairly well in the circumstances. He hadn't managed to find any trace of the others on the planet he had woken up on, chakra sensing over a wide range being something he had picked up from Erosenin during the resistance against the metal men that people called robots here. It didn't work on the robots as they didn't produce chakra, but it certainly kept him ahead of Orochimaru's troops. His clones had spread far and wide in the time he had been on Eden Prime, and given the negative response he had received from them, Naruto had to conclude that he had been moved at some stage from his home, whether by the robots or some other race like these Protheans everyone had gone on about he didn't know. Summoning also hadn't worked, but if he had been asleep for as long as Nali and the others claimed, the chances of there still being any toads left to summon were small, to say the least. Many of his friends would have questioned going with the strange people who had come to collect Jane after they reached the beacon. After all, he didn't know anything about these other humans other than the fact they were fighting against the machine men and the zombies. But it wasn't like he had anywhere else to go or another method of getting off planet, and given the rather dramatic increase in the search area he had for his friends, now Naruto needed to at least get himself to somewhere he could start gathering proper information. That didn't mean he was stupid enough to trust the other humans. After all, one of the first things Zyrika had taught him in the academy was that anyone not wearing a leaf headband should be considered a possible enemy at all times. Of course, Mizuki, Kabuto, and Orochimaru had all proved since then that you couldn't even use the headband as a discerning form of friend/foe identification, but Naruto was doing his best not to think like that right now. So he had taken to hiding in the shadowed places of the Normandy, and allowing his clones to act for him, something he knew annoyed this Captain Anderson no end. There was no killing intent from the crew, so Naruto wasn't too worried, especially when Jane had woken up and started talking to his clones like they were in fact meant to be on the ship, but you could never be too cautious. That was why he instructed his clones to make himself out to be more dangerous and experienced than he seemed at first glance. 7 years of experience certainly sounded a lot better than the year and a half that he actually had as a genin. Hopefully that would stop anyone trying to start something. Actually, now Naruto thought about it, other than Wave, he wasn't actually sure how much of his first 6 months counted as combat experience either. But that wasn't important. The captain had seemed to believe him, and there wasn't really any way they could really counter his claim, unless they actually did have one of his friends, in which case all hell was going to break loose. Any misdirection was good misdirection, as one of the surviving Konoha ninja had told him after the initial attack, though his clone was probably overdoing it with that stupid honor-bound comment. He had tried to present the public image that Konoha used when it was trying to win in civilian contracts for its ninja, showing them as bodyguards and warriors who would protect their clients to the death rather than the no-holds-barred killers most became. But he wasn't a bloody samurai for Kami's sake. He liked Jane. She had been interesting on Eden Prime and obviously not one to stand aside and let her subordinates do all the dangerous jobs. Not to mention the fact she had pushed him out of the way when his white samurai had kicked in to manhandle Ashley out of range of the beacon. So he had intended on trying to stay with her in any case, especially once he found out about this Spectre thing she was being assessed for. It sounded exactly what he needed to carry on searching for his friends around the galaxy. But the damage had been done now, and he would have to keep up the honor-bound charade, or it would cast suspicion on what else Naruto had told them. Jane, Anderson, and one of his clones had spent quite some time during their travel to the Citadel talking to someone called Ambassador Udina, who seemed to be one of the high-up politicians in this human alliance, and one of the people they were traveling to the Citadel to go and see. Naruto didn't like him, but then again Naruto had never really liked people whose arrogance was based on their position's power as opposed to any skill they actually had. Despite the dim view he had to say, the ambassador had raised a few good points. Supposedly it had been agreed with the council that Naruto would on paper be classed as an alliance citizen, both to avoid any issues when he was boarding the Citadel and also to try and minimize any scrutiny he would receive from other parties due to his sudden appearance. It hadn't worked, given the attempted abduction that occurred right after arriving at the giant space station, but Naruto wasn't really surprised. It had hardly been a half-decent espionage attempt in his eyes. His clone, as the real him watched from a nearby alleyway, had been a bit overzealous in dealing with his attacker. Naruto still preferred to avoid killing if he could avoid it, but given the dark memories being called subject and thing had brought to his mind, it was understandable if not entirely reprehensible. The fight, if it could really be called that, had delayed them for a couple of hours as an investigation by other officers of this CCC division took place into why 2 of their officers had been gunned down in the middle of a crowded docking area. Naruto's clone had been interviewed by 3 separate people before finally a Turian entered and introduced himself as Executor Palin. Given how quickly Naruto had been released under the man's orders, that probably meant he was very powerful in the CCC organization. Palin had escorted him to his office where he had made it clear that he knew the truth about Naruto's origins, affirming Naruto's suspicions that he was in fact an important person on the Citadel and to the council, and that if Naruto wanted to stay under the radar he would need to avoid utilizing his rather unique method of combat on the Citadel. Palin had told him any more bodies turning up with obvious stab wounds and without due authorization would ensure that he would be seeing a lot more of the inside of a cell, regardless of any demands from the council or others. The fact that he specified the bit about authorization made Naruto grin internally, even as his clone made a promise and left to head over to the embassy. Obviously, there might be a chance to do some freelance work on the Citadel if things were that bad here that an executor, whatever that was offering authorized vigilante work. Upon returning to the human embassy, Naruto had found Jane and the others getting prepped to go see the council about the attack on Eden Prime, with Udina rather snidely insisting that he stop wasting everyone's time so that they could get going. As he followed Jane and his clone as they exited the lift from the council chambers from the obscurity of the crowds milling around the Presidium, Naruto was a little surprised by how easy it had been for his clone to mess with the esteemed council's show trial. Naruto would be the first to admit that he was ill-suited towards many of the seedier parts that came with being a traditional ninja. But in a ninja village, when everyone talked in half-truths, insinuations and inferences, you either learned to become a decently skilled verbal combatant, or you became a sucker for everyone, and Naruto was no sucker. Saren's attitude and general demeanor left so many holes for him to attack. It must have been hard for the clone to keep himself at the 3 points he had used. A couple of hinged agitators in the crowd doing the rest of the work for him. God, he loved shadow clones. Once Udina and Anderson had given them their targets after the council dismissed them, he already had half a dozen of them flitting through the station. If anything about Saren did come up elsewhere on the station, he would probably be the first one to hear it. But he could worry about that later. Naruto was now keeping track of at least 3 people who were tracking Jane and the others with various degrees of subtlety. Now, Naruto couldn't just kill or knock them out. After the attention they had received earlier, it was likely that at least one of the shadows was council-aligned and Naruto was already in their bad books. But whilst he couldn't tell who was reporting to whom and therefore who he could take out, that didn't mean that he couldn't cause them to become delayed. 5 minutes, and 2 hinged shadow clones later, 2 of the people who had been following Jane were being questioned by CCC over indecent assault charges and theft respectively. The Solarian and the Asari Shadowers were completely blindsided by the claims of the 2 Nali lookalikes he had created for the task. It wouldn't stick, or at least it probably wouldn't, but that wasn't important to Naruto as he perched above the walkway leading to Korra's den. What was important was the 2 Turians he had found armed and ready for combat, waiting for the arrival of someone. With Jane on the way, Naruto had a sinking feeling he knew exactly who was the pair's target. A small smirk came over his face as he thought about it for a moment, stowing the scroll with Kushina in it, and shifting positions so that he was directly above one of the 2 Turians. There was nothing better than a counter-ambush to lighten a ninja's day. Chapter 5: Political Promotions. It all happened so fast that if she hadn't felt the impact of rounds upon her shields, Jane might have thought she had just imagined the sound of assault gun fire. They had been walking to Korra's den after checking in with Executor Palin. Checking in with the head of law enforcement on the Citadel, Naruto's idea, given they were wanting to carry out an investigation into someone who had already proved that he was more than happy to hire someone else to try and take them out, and also was a known politically savvy adversary. That now seemed to be a very good idea, seeing as they were under attack. She didn't know how Naruto had done it, but after explaining what their plan was, Palin and Naruto had merely looked at each other for a moment before Palin allowed them to investigate further into Saren, as long as they had a CCC member with them whenever they performed any investigatory work. This would allow for the evidence to be used in legal proceedings without fear of it being thrown out for being contaminated. Given they had been going to find Gurus anyway, Jane was more than happy to agree, since the writ that Palin gave them would allow them to act as conscripts to CCC under Gurus for the duration of the investigation. But it wouldn't cover them being attacked before they found Gurus. Drawing her shotgun against the new threat, Jane was surprised when suddenly the Turian who had shot at her was downed by a familiar figure who descended left foot first onto the Turian's back, sending the Turian to the floor with shields shattering under the force even as Naruto spun in the air. His foot slammed into the other Turian's jaw even as he turned with weapon ready, shotgun going off over Naruto's left shoulder as the young ninja then went to work with his fists, 2 blows slamming into the Turian's shields in less than a second, before they failed spectacularly. The Turian tried to back up even as Shepard and the others moved up to hem him in, but Naruto didn't give him any space and bodily threw the Turian into the wall next to him so hard he actually bounced off and rolled over twice before coming to a groaning stop. Indicating for Kaden to check the first Turian, Shepard kicked the second one's shotgun away from him before turning to the Naruto that had counter-ambushed them. Given his slightly heavier breathing, Shepard had a suspicion and decided to test it a moment later. There was the start of a cry from the Naruto next to her as she cuffed him round the head, causing him to explode into smoke a moment later, drawing a confused look from the Naruto in front of her. "You are the real one, I assume?" It was more a statement than a question, and given Naruto's slight widening of the eyebrows, Jane knew she was spot on. But she didn't elaborate any further than that. After all, if she did tell him that she had based her guess on the fact that his clones didn't alter their breathing unless they were absolutely exhausted, then he would just make sure to cover that for next time. Good work on these two, though a little warning would be nice next time. The mixed compliment and rebuke made Naruto smile a little sheepishly even as Ashley and Kaden finished checking them for weapons or other equipment, the two pistols, supply of Medigel, and small stock of grenades, showing that the pair had properly been prepared for battle rather than this being a random mugging attempt. "Can your clones take these two to CSEC whilst we move on? Even if they did try and kill us, it is a bit heartless to leave them unconscious and bound in an area like this. It also might get them in Palin's good books and even the name of the person that hired them to try and kill her, but primarily because she liked to think of herself as having some morals." Naruto nodded, and a moment later a trio of clones appeared before shifting themselves into nondescript humans. Two of them staying stood over the bodies whilst the third flitted off back the way they had come, undoubtedly to get a hold of CCC and bring them here rather than try and take two unconscious Turians through the wards. Jane also instructed the clones to take the Turians' weapons, primarily to deter those she could already see skulking nearby, but also to stop the Turians from causing any trouble if they woke up. If CCC wanted to take the weapons, that was fine, but Shepard had always been a bit of an opportunist, and if the opportunity to obtain a couple of extra weapons was there, she would happily take it. Now all she needed to do was stop the real Naruto from bailing at the first opportunity, and leaving her stuck with the clone again. Persona Naruto. They had checked in with Harkin, the drunken layabout, quickly fraying both Jane's and his own temper with his attitude, but the information about where they could find Garrus was very useful. Almost too useful, in fact, Naruto thought as he checked the last of the bodies in the clinic that the 5 of them had just cleared. Harkin was probably much better at intel gathering than everyone realized if he was able to keep such good tabs on any one person amongst the thousands in CCC. Something for him to investigate further at another time. The information Dr. Michel had provided them meant that they had an actual tangible lead, though given their potential source was unknowingly trying to give her damning information to their enemy without realizing it, that might mean nothing. Garrus and Shepard were all for storming back to Korra's den and dealing with Fist until they found out where this mysterious Quarian was, but the memories of 2 of his clones that he had received in the last few minutes made Naruto a little more cautious about the potential backlash. Clone 1 memory. I have station-wide reports of a vigilante who has taken out over a dozen muggers, drug dealers, and other unsavory characters in a matter of 3 hours, despite the net distance between the different events being far than would be possible by a human not using the taxi car system, and knowing where each event was going to take place in advance. It is almost as if there were in fact multiple copies of the same person scattered throughout the Citadel. Executor Palin gave Naruto a nonplussed look at this point, something Naruto could understand now that he had looked the Citadel up a lot more on the extranet. Each of the 5 arms that made up the Citadel's main body had 40,000-odd CSEC officers serving as a mixture of the police and other emergency response units, and right at the top of that pile was the Turian sat in front of him. The only reason the executor had time to deal with him in person was that each of the armed districts ran themselves pretty much independently, leaving the executor primarily to control the funding of the overall organization. The joint operations between the different groups, and of course the CCC Royal Guard who protected the Presidium and the council chambers. Given the rather ridiculous responsibilities of the man's tasks, Naruto could see how Palin was a little upset with him rocking the boat with his extracurricular work, but he felt he had to defend his actions a little at this stage. What else was I meant to do, Executor-san? Let those people get away with what they were doing. Someone could have gotten killed if I had ignored it. Palin seemed to be a little less upset at his protest, which was a good thing, but then he seemed to remember something else that had no doubt been mentioned in the reports. And the fact that all of the individuals in question had been stripped of their armor, weapons, and money before being tied to various objects with present for CCC inscribed in some kind of pen into their foreheads. By the Primarch Uzumaki, one of them was a Krogan. So the boss's other clones had reverted a little to their pranking ways, understandable given his frustration at things. And the weapons etc. were a good start on making some money of his own so that he wouldn't have to keep scrounging off Shepard all the time, though telling Palin that probably wouldn't earn him any plus points. So Naruto fell back on an old trick of his he had used with the Sandame Hokage back when he had been a child. No idea what that is about. I am sure I had nothing to do with that occurring, Executor-san. True in the strictest sense, this particular clone had nothing to do with it. Palin seemed to realize the game he was playing and sighed in frustration before flicking something across the table to him, a silver badge that Naruto had only heard about when he had been looking up the organization on the internet. Well, if I can't stop you from doing these things on MY Station, I can at least make sure you do it properly. You are now a contracted CCC agent, and will be able to stop crimes in progress, though no more taking people's gear unless there's a valid reason for such actions, understood? Looking down at the little badge with a giant grin on his face, Naruto had nodded his head. He was going to have a lot of fun with this. Clone 1 memory end. Yeah, best Naruto let the Executor know of what they were planning, even with Geras and now him there to make the thing slightly less illegal. The fact they had already killed half a dozen people and not even started did not bode well for a bloodless incident to come. And if that was going to be the case, then there was someone else they probably wanted along for the ride. Clone 2 memory. The clone had been in the Presidium CCC building when he had heard mention of trouble at Korra's den being discussed by a CCC officer, as he and 3 other officers escorted a particularly well-scarred Krogan from the holding cells. And stay away from Korra's den, Wrex, you are already in trouble for the incident upon your arrival, any more and? The CCC officer stopped as the Krogan merely turned and cast him a glowering look, the officers reaching for their weapons as he growled. You'll do what, dog? I could take you all down before you hand a chance to use those weapons, and you know it. Let Fist know that I am coming for him, and just pray you aren't the one he calls for help from when I do. The Krogan was certainly interesting, and dangerous enough to cow 4 officers of the law into backing down inside their own bloody HQ. If he was going to be aiming for Korra's den, then it was best if the boss knew right away. Clone 2 memory end. A quick search on the extranet by one of his other clones had highlighted the Krogan warlord's infamous and bloody career that stretched back almost a millennia. When it came to battle experience and body count, Naruto doubted anyone could claim to have more than Wrex did. And now they had a common enemy, though Naruto hoped that Wrex would see it that way as he called out to Shepard to tell her of his plans. If Wrex decided they instead were competition, then it wouldn't be Fist they had to worry about. Time skip. Luckily, Wrex had decided that extra help wouldn't be an issue, especially when Jane had made it clear that she wasn't trying to get in on the bounty money and merely wanted information from the man. Naruto had offered to keep searching the wards whilst they stormed Korra's den. Given his still rather pathetic accuracy with the guns everyone seemed so fond of and Palin's request that he not use his spear unless absolutely necessary, he would most likely be as much a spectator as an asset. He had some jutsu he could use, of course, but the more of those he could keep under wraps the better. Jane had given him a long look that reminded him of Sakura-chan when she wasn't entirely sure if she trusted what he had said, a look that still struck him with phantom terror that he had done or said something that would set off the cherry blossom's rather short emotional fuse. Guessing what it is Jane wanted, he promised he would keep in touch via the comms and that he would be the one coming back. That seemed to confuse both Geras and Wrex, but Naruto was fine with that. The 2 aliens only just on first-name terms with him would have to somehow stick around for quite some time before he gave them anything else. With Shepard's taciturn approval, Naruto had jogged off whilst the others made their move towards Korra's den, the sounds of fighting and gunfire letting Naruto know quite how prepared Fist had been for trouble. Another strike against the Council and CSEC's internal security, given Palin had only given approval for the raid 20 minutes ago, and the paperwork would probably not be cleared for the next couple of hours. But they could worry about that once they found this Quarian and had her safe from any other reprisals Saren might have in store. Given there were thousands of Quarians in the ring wards alone, the idea that he would be able to find the one they needed was laughable given the lack of distinguishing features the bodysuited aliens had to offer. But given that if Fist hadn't already met and killed her, then she would not be in Korra's den, then having people spread out through the station would be beneficial if Fist did know anything useful about her. Naruto. Jane's voice over the comms was a surprising relief to Shepard after the minutes of silence after the fighting. He had originally been worried that they had been overwhelmed by Fist's security. Yes, Shepard Taishu? Whilst waiting for her continue speaking, Naruto created another clone, which would act as a relay to the other clones on the station when it dispelled. Fist is talking. Seems he still has this Quarian under the impression that he works for the Shadow Broker. She has asked to meet with the Shadow Broker in person, which would never happen, but Fist has claimed that he has arranged it at a secluded location in the wards. I am sending you the location now. The meet is in 10 minutes, which is cutting it close from the Denver. What is your ETA? Looking at his Omni tool, a present from Jane that worked a lot better than the original piece of outdated crap Udina had presented him with, Naruto realized that he was nearly at the location she had highlighted. I can be there and set up in 2 minutes, Shepard Taishu. What are your orders if the Quarian arrives before you do? There was a murmured discussion on the other end of the line before Jane spoke once more. If possible, warn the Quarian and then keep her hidden and safe until we arrive. If that isn't possible, and as Fist claims there are assassins from Saren waiting for her, deal with them however is necessary, but keep that Quarian alive. Easy enough orders then. Now to go check out the ambush site. Persona Tali. Turning into the alley that Fist had told her the Shadow Broker's agents would be waiting to vet her, and then lead her to the Shadow Broker himself, Tali seriously regretted ever taking that data off the Geth's memory banks. Since then she had been hounded halfway across the galaxy, and even now was constantly looking over her shoulder in case one of Saren's men had finally managed to track her down. There were 3 people waiting for her in the alley. A Turian stood in an obviously impatient manner, and a pair of Solarians leaning against a power unit a little further down. The Turian noticed her arrival and gestured with his arm. Did you bring it? That question brought Tali up short for a moment. This wasn't how Fist had said things were going to go. What about the Shadow Broker? And where is Fist? There was a sinking feeling in her stomach as the Turian sighed and shrugged in a very uncaring manner. They will be here. Now where is evidence? So either Fist lied to her or the Shadow Broker decided not to bother with an exchange. Either way, Tali needed to leave right now. No way, the deal is off. The fact that this didn't seem to surprise or upset the Turian was another warning bell, joining the half a dozen others that were going off in her head as all 3 of them suddenly drew pistols in an obviously menacing manner. Tali went to palm the grenade that had been in her belt for this exact reason, calculating mentally the distance between where she was stood now and the nearest cover, when suddenly her world vision spun. A moment later she found herself collapsed on one of the walkways overlooking the alley, even as the 3 assassins opened fire at where she had been standing. As she moved to right herself from the strange half-lying position she found herself in, Tali froze as a hand covered the lower half of her face visor, the feeling of someone else pulling her to them in a firm but not overly threatening manner, a new and rather unique sensation. Sure, don't move or they will hear you, Quarian-chan. The voice was obviously male and her internal communications display showed he was talking a human language called Japanese, and despite the plethora of questions about how she had gotten to where she was and who he was, Tali did as he asked. The assassins were still searching the nearby hiding places for her when suddenly the male holding her in place spoke once more, though this time it obviously wasn't to her. I have the Quarian. There are 3 of them, Shepard Taishu. Want me to take them out? Tali didn't hear the reply but by the Krogan roar that reverberated around the alleyway. After all, there was no other species in the galaxy that could be quite that terrifying with a simple noise. Followed by the sharp staccato of gunfire made it clear that whoever this person was working with had decided to sort things out for themselves. The grip on her visor and waist suddenly released, and Tali took the opportunity to rapidly move away from her erstwhile savior/captor, turning to look at who it was she owed her rescue to. The first impression she got looking at the blonde-haired human in front of her was that he was quite young, even by the standard of the few humans she had interacted with since starting her pilgrimage. But even in a crouched position he had a confidence that made her wary even as his eyes shifted between her and the fight below. She went to grab her pistol, more to reassure herself that she had some defense left as opposed to trying to threaten him, but her hand met an empty holster. Looking for this Quarian-chan? Her frantic panicking abated slightly as she saw the human holding her pistol in his left hand, not even slightly contrite as he held it out to her with a cheeky grin on his face. "Apologies, but I didn't want you to do anything stupid when I grabbed you, Quarian-chan. Now, judging by the fact that those guys just tried to kill you, I think I would be safe in saying you need a hand, correct?" As she took back her pistol with slightly shaking hands, her delayed response to the life-death situation she had been in, Tali knew without asking that the man was not asking and more telling her that he and whoever this Shepard was had business with her whether she liked it or not. But given that her last shot of evading Saren by going to Fist had failed terribly, it wasn't like Tali had any other options, not that she could probably get away from this guy if she wanted to, given how easily he had held her in place and spirited her away from the ambush. Still, even if she knew that this man might well kill her for it, Tali would rather die quickly as opposed to walking into yet another trap naively. "You're not with Saren, are you, human? Not that I am ungrateful for you saving me or anything, and even if you were, I am sure that I wouldn't be able to stop you if you did want to hurt me." "Oh, Keela," she was babbling again, "this is embarrassing." Luckily, the human didn't seem to mind as he grinned at her before shaking his head. "No, in fact he is part of the reason why Shepard Taishu is here. We are in fact trying to gather evidence against him. Evidence he obviously already knew she had, otherwise they probably wouldn't be having this conversation." The human paused for a second before looking down and speaking again. "Looks like they are done, Quarian-chan, so I think we had best get back down there. But not a word of where we went to anyone, okay?" Tali nodded a little distractedly, a small part of her mind noting that it would be hard for her to tell anyone how they had got up there given she had no idea. For the most part she was more assessing the 30-foot drop and quite how the human intended for them to get down. Persona Jane Shepard. And one step closer to the return of the Reapers. The woman's voice reverberated around the council chambers after the damning rendition of Saren's boastful comment. Even now, after having heard it half a dozen times, Shepard was absolutely giddy at sticking it to the bastard. They had only met that once, but he had managed to piss her off more than anyone that wasn't a Batarian. Of course, the council had to verify the recording that Tali had submitted to Executor Palin, an idea from Anderson to further remove the idea this was a human crusade against the Spectre. But with Palin's word and with no signs of tampering, the council had no recourse other than to admit they were wrong this time. Probably why the council rooms had been cleared of everyone but ambassadors and other high-ranking council race members. "You wanted proof, there it is." Udina for once was selective with his wording, but his smugness was easy to hear even as the mutterings of the ambassadors started up with earnest. Obviously this kind of embarrassment to the council and their little force of operatives didn't happen very often. "This proof is irrefutable, Ambassador. Saren will be stripped of his Spectre status, and all efforts will be made to bring him to justice." When the Turian finished speaking, the Asari spoke with a slightly disbelieving tone tinging her melodic voice. "I recognize that other voice, the one speaking with Saren in the recording. As much as I don't want to believe it, that is the voice of Matriarch Benezia." Shepard was not as up-to-date with Asari culture as he would perhaps have liked, but anyone with an obviously powerful title like Matriarch was not someone he wanted on Saren's side. "I am unfamiliar with the term Matriarch and this Benezia counselor. Would you please enlighten us?" The Asari nodded, tone firmer as she spoke of the culture of her people. "Matriarchs are powerful Asari who have entered the final stages of their lives. They are revered for their wisdom and collected experiences. Often they serve as guides or teachers to my people. Due to their hallowed status, matriarchs are venerated by many young Asari who will follow their path almost without question. Matriarch Benezia is one of the most powerful biotics of her generation, and her teachings have given her many followers. If for whatever reason she has allied herself with Saren, then she will give him a formidable array of resources to wield in addition to his established Spectre network." Shepard felt like turning and smashing her head against a wall. An ex-Spectre with an army of Geth and allied with a very powerful Asari with a sizable force of her own and centuries of experience? This day just kept getting better and better. The Solarian spoke up in the ensuing silence, obviously eager to shift the focus away from what was quickly becoming a rather major political embarrassment for him and his colleagues. "I am more interested in Saren's mention of the Reapers in the recording. Obviously, if he was on Eden Prime for the beacon, as has now been proven, he is trying to gather information on them. Captain Anderson, Commander Shepard, what do you know about them? Anderson took a step forward and Shepard let his superior speak. He could tag on any other information the captain didn't mention at the end. Only what Tali here managed to extract from the Geth data core along with the recording about Saren. The mention and gesture to the nervous Quarian girl had the Salarian narrow his eyes in distaste whilst the Turian full-on frowned, the two's expressions making Tali look like she was about to bolt. As Anderson carried on speaking, Shepard was both slightly amused and surprised when Naruto moved from slightly behind her and to the left, stepping across purposefully to stand between Tali and the council, crossing his arms and giving a blank stare as the Turian focused on him whilst the Salarian looked away a little uncomfortably. The Reapers are an ancient race of machine that wiped out the Protheans before suddenly they vanished from the known galaxy. Seeing her chance to interject with her own view as Anderson finished speaking, Shepard spoke up, her eyes never leaving the Turian counselor's own after the counselor looked away from Naruto. The Geth seemed to revere the Reapers almost as gods, and whether using the Geth for his own ends or because he actually believes he can do so, Saren is becoming their prophet for the Reapers' return. Whatever this conduit is that Saren mentions, it is obviously key to bringing them back. That is why he attacked Eden Prime, he is searching for it, and the beacon was a clue. The counselors looked unconvinced even as Shepard spoke, but that was unsurprising as it was one hell of a tough sell, but it was certainly how it looked based on what she had seen thus far. Do we even know what the conduit is that they are searching for? The Salarian was at least being objective if skeptical about the whole thing, which was something Shepard could certainly respect and appreciate given the almost unthinking denial from his compatriots. Seeing Anderson glance at her, it was obvious Jane was to field the question. No, we don't, but does that really matter, counselors? Saren believes it exists, and has shown that he will happily destroy entire colonies in his attempts to find it. The Turian almost didn't speak at that comment, seeming to second-guess himself for a moment before uttering a response in an incensed tone that truly showed the man was now under pressure. Listen to yourself, Commander. You think that Saren wants to bring back an armada of machines that wiped out all advanced life in the galaxy 50,000 years ago? It is impossible nonsense. It has to be. If the Reapers do exist, where did they go? Why would they leave after completely winning what must have been a costly conflict for them? And there has been no trace of their existence other than a few garbled texts obviously written by madmen? If they were real, we would have had to have found something. Obviously, the Turian was more focused on quelling the panic that would arise from the existence of a galaxy-cleansing machine attack, rather than trying to prevent the possibility of it happening. Shepard sighed. She could already see where this was going, but had to try and get it into their heads quite how big a deal this actually was. Regardless of whether or not the Reapers are still around, the fact that Saren is searching the galaxy for them is proof enough we need to take action. Better to have taken action needlessly than have been caught unawares. The Asari shook her head, which didn't really surprise Shepard all that much. What you are proposing is different to the issue of dealing with Saren. I will admit we were wrong about Saren and you proved that, for some reason he is after this conduit device, but we do not really know why. The Reapers are obviously just a myth, Commander, one that Saren is using both to utilize the Geth as well as to hide his true purpose, whatever that may be. The Salarian seemed a bit unsure of the Asari's words but kept his mouth shut as the Turian counselor weighed in. Not that it matters anymore, Saren has been stripped of his title, resources and manpower. Whatever he hoped to achieve will be difficult whilst he has no means to achieve them. Shepard actually couldn't believe the Turian's comment given what they had just discussed, barely restraining herself from losing all control of her temper and letting rip with what she thought of the honored counselor's opinions. I'm sorry, Counselor Sama, but if that is your opinion, I think we have just been listening to two very different conversations. All rage dissipated from Jane's shoulders as her new best friend spoke up for the first time since the hearing had begun, Jane enjoying the slight look of concern that passed over the Asari counselor's face before she too turned to look at the young ninja. Though Naruto's pose was the same as when he had moved in front of Tali before, there was now a rigidness of his body that spoke of anger he was doing a magnificent job of keeping from his voice as he gestured around the room almost mockingly. I can't speak for all of these good people, of course. It might be my translator that acted up. So to clarify, Counselor Sama, Saren has an army of Geth that, whilst of an unknown size, is certainly large enough to prevent the Quarians from trying to retake their home. This is with them having the largest single fleet in the galaxy, of course. In addition, he has a ship that is larger than the Destiny Ascension, along with a wizened Asari and her own band of followers, again of unknown size and skill. Whoever taught Naruto to ovate needed to give her lessons, Jane decided as he paused for just a moment to let the true magnitude of what this now ex-Spectre had to command, before Naruto gave his final blow of his impromptu speech. Is that what you meant when he had no resources or manpower, that humanity needed to be worried about, Counselor Sama? Or did I get a mistranslation of all of that? There was silence for several moments as everyone in the chamber tried to work out whether Naruto had in fact pointed straight at the elephant in the room they had all been ignoring, or merely pointed at the footsteps and let everyone else make their own conclusions. The council seemed to have learnt their lesson from last time about reacting instantly to Naruto's unsubtle jibes hidden in his attempt to clear up a possible mistranslation. God, she was going to have to use that one at some point in the future. Instead, the three of them spoke quietly for a moment before the Solarian spoke up a little hesitantly. You definitely do not hide your feelings or mince your words, young man, even if you do better at veiling your accusations now, something I think my fellow counselors are not used to. I agree with you, this is a threat we cannot simply ignore, but you must understand, we as the council cannot bring the galaxy into turmoil rashly. Even with the threat Saren poses to humanity's colonies. The grin that appeared on Naruto's face showed the Solarian's mistake, the words lighting a fire in Udina as he whirled back to face the council from where he had been watching Naruto approvingly, voice loud and angry. Enough, I have had it with the anti-human resentment shown here. You have in effect given this lapdog of yours enough power and resources to damage humanity's interests for decades if not centuries to come, and now you say you will do nothing? You might as well be giving Saren's attacks against us your personal blessing. Shepard had to admit Udina had a surprising gift for altering the tone and meaning of a conversation to his advantage, even if he was just rehashing Naruto's material from the last council meeting. Naruto didn't seem to mind though, the ninja allowing the focus to shift from him to the ambassador, his work seemingly done for the moment, and now content to become lost in the crowd once more. Even with very few humans in the room this time, there was a lot of angry murmuring now, primarily from the races like the Volus and the Elcor, who had always been in the shadow of the council and were now obviously wondering if there was a reason for that. I would remind you of who you are speaking to before you accuse us so blatantly of corruption and wrongdoing, Ambassador Udina. We have not and will not give Saren any such support that you have alluded to, but for us to strike out into the terminus blindly and without direction would be worse for everyone, including humanity. What I was going to say before your brazen attempt at mob politics hit the stage was that there is another option, one that does not involve fleets or armies directly. The Asari obviously realized that the council were very quickly being backed into a corner, from which they would only have had were two very unpleasant and far-reaching ways of dealing with the problem. So she was trying to take the third wildcard option that Jane had almost entirely forgotten about given the events since Eden Prime, the Turian counselor realizing at the same time what the Asari was implying and obviously not happy with it in the slightest. No! Humanity is not ready for the responsibility. The Turian, though obviously incensed, trailed off quickly as the Asari turned a baleful glare in his direction, even as grumbling erupted in the watching crowds once more. She assessed the tension in the room before whispering across to the Turian, Jane only catching it as she had her suit microphone trained on her. This situation is already a political nightmare as it is. If we are seen to do nothing now, the Alliance could well break from the Council, if not worse. This way we do not risk galactic war and give humanity what we were going to give them anyway. Judging by the cheeky grin and wink from Naruto after she heard that, Jane had no doubt he had heard the same as she had. And somehow Jane got the idea that this was what his intervention had been in aid of in the first place, to push the Council into a corner where they would promote her to a Spectre rather than just try and brush the whole thing under a rug. With that, the Asari looked over to the Solarian counselor, who nodded quickly before turning back to face the four humans and the others. The Turian looked like he was going to refuse for a moment, but then all three typed something into the console in front of them, the Asari counselor speaking up a moment later. Commander Shepard, step forward. A glance to Shepard's right and a quick nod from Anderson told Shepard This was about to be the big moment she had been told to expect upon landing on the Citadel from Eden Prime. Stepping up so that she was stood next to Udina, Jane looked around to see the viewing platforms quiet and in obvious anticipation of what was to come. It is the decision of the Council, having reviewed your actions both on Eden Prime and before that, to grant you all of the powers and privileges of the Special Tactics and Reconnaissance branch of the Council. As the Council carried on an obviously scripted and well-practiced intermix of short speeches, Jane couldn't help but feel a little cheated. Even with everything she had done, all the achievements and sacrifices she had gone through, her promotion was now based on political intrigue and what was essentially blackmail. Even as she put on a fake smile and said her acceptance of the offer, Jane berated that rather depreciating thought, her thoughts turning more positive as she turned to face the crowd and her eyes locked with Naruto's. The young ninja gave her 2 thumbs up before joining in the clapping, and somehow, that made the whole ordeal somewhat more bearable.